The first time I saw the surveyor's report, my hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, disbelieving rage. According to the precise lines and coordinates on that document, the sprawling, three-story Mediterranean mansion, belonging to HOA President Evelyn Vance, the very woman who had fined me for a faded mailbox, wasn't just near my property line. Its foundation, its glittering pool, its entire western wing sat squarely on my land. She had built her palace of privilege on dirt that belonged to me. For years, I had watched her host lavish parties on that very patio, all while she sent me violation notices for petty infractions. Quick pause. Where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments right now. Now let's continue. But the game was over. I had the proof, and I was about to use the law not just to take back what was mine, but to take everything she had built her false empire upon. This is the story of how a quiet, unassuming homeowner unearthed a conspiracy of greed and, in a final courtroom showdown, made a corrupt HOA president surrender the keys to her own dream home. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you have to understand the peace that was stolen. My 3 acres on the edge of the Sonoma County foothills were my sanctuary, my reward for 30 years of meticulous work as a federal land surveyor. I knew contours and boundaries better than I knew the lines on my own face. When I retired, I didn't want a golf course community or a suburban subdivision. I wanted space, silence, and the uncompromised truth of a clean property line. I found it in a parcel of land that had been passed over by developers for being too rugged, too sloped, too real. It was perfect. I built the house myself, mostly. Put yourself in my shoes. What would you do if someone built on your land? Tell me below. A modest, sturdy ranch-style home with a deep porch that looked west toward the mountains. The soil was tested, the foundation was poured exactly according to the certified plot plans I had filed myself with the county recorder's office. Every inch was measured, every boundary pin was placed with a surveyor's precision and cemented into the ground. My land was my masterpiece, a testament to a career built on accuracy and order. For 5 years, the only sounds were the wind in the juniper trees and the distant cry of hawks. The only correspondence in my mailbox were seed, catalogs, and letters from old friends. That changed when the bulldozers arrived on the adjacent parcel. The pristine scrubland to the south was sold, flattened, and transformed into Serenity Heights, a gated community of imposing homes with a mandatory homeowners association. Overnight, my quiet horizon was replaced with the skeletal frames of McMansions. The HOA president, Evelyn Vance, introduced herself not with a welcome basket, but with a violation notice. It was slipped under my door one Tuesday morning, printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock with an embossed seal. It cited my wooden fence, stained a natural, weather-sealed cedar, as being non-compliant with the community's aesthetic standards of pure white vinyl. The notice was polite, legalistic, and utterly absurd. I was not, and had never been, a member of Serenity Heights HOA. My property predated its existence by half a decade. I ignored it. That was my first mistake. To Evelyn Vance, my silence was not a statement of principle. It was a challenge to her authority. The notices kept coming. My native, drought-resistant landscaping was deemed unkempt. The shutter-free windows on my house were accused of creating a blank, unwelcoming facade. The vintage truck I was restoring in my own driveway was labeled an eyesore. Each citation was more frivolous than the last, each envelope thicker with the implied threat of fines and legal action. I began to see her, a perfectly coiffed figure in tailored athleisure wear, standing at the edge of my property. She would make notes on her iPad, her expression one of clinical disapproval, as if my existence was a problem to be solved. Her house, the largest in Serenity Heights, was going up at an alarming speed just beyond my southern border. It was a monument to excess, with towering windows, multiple balconies, and a vast patio that seemed to creep closer to my line every week. The hum of construction became the soundtrack to my days, a constant reminder that my sanctuary was under siege. I held on to my deed, my surveys, my quiet anger. I was a man of lines and measurements, and my lines were clear, or so I believed. Because while I was dismissing her petty citations, Evelyn Vance was executing a much larger, much more audacious plan. She wasn't just trying to control my property, she was preparing to steal it. And the first clue was so small, so seemingly insignificant that I almost missed it entirely. A single, bright orange surveyor's flag, placed not on her side of the I line, but on mine. The official notice arrived on a day that felt like the calm before a storm. The sky was a hard, cloudless blue, and the air was so still you could hear the buzz of a single bee working the lavender bushes by my porch. The mail truck came and went, its departure leaving behind a profound silence. In my mailbox, among the circulars and a postcard from an old friend, was a long, stiff envelope. The paper was thick and expensive, the kind that feels like money. The return address was printed in a severe sans serif font. Law Offices of Finch and Sterling Counsel for the Serenity Heights Homeowners Association. My name was typed with a formality that felt like an accusation. Inside, the language was a dense thicket of legalese, but the message was brutally clear. It was a final notice of encroachment and demand for immediate remediation. According to the attached document, a crudely drawn map that looked like it had been sketched on a napkin, a significant portion of my workshop and a slice of my backyard were allegedly trespassing on land that belonged to the Serenity Heights HOA. The letter demanded I cease all use of the encroached upon area, remove my structures, and submit to a boundary reconciliation process at my own expense. The audacity of it stole my breath. I had been a federal surveyor for 3 decades. I had mapped remote wilderness areas with more accuracy than this document possessed. The map they provided was an insult, a child's drawing over a blurry satellite image. Their claimed property line cut a jagged, nonsensical path that conveniently placed Evelyn Vance's new swimming pool well on their side of the border. It was a lie, drawn in ink and delivered with the full weight of legal stationery. I didn't. Wait. I went straight to my fireproof safe and pulled out the original county-stamped survey from when I purchased the land. I laid it on my kitchen table, the crisp lines and precise coordinates a soothing balm to my fury. Then I placed the HOA's map next to it. The discrepancy was not a minor error of a few feet. It was a land grab of nearly an acre. They had simply redrawn the map to include the most valuable flat portion of my property, the part that now supported the back half of the HOA president's mansion. That evening I saw her. Evelyn was hosting some sort of cocktail party on her vast patio, the very one that, according to my legitimate survey, was hosting guests on my land. Laughter and the clink of glasses carried on the still air. She stood there, a glass of white, wine in her hand holding court. For a moment her eyes met mine across the divide. There was no smile, no wave, no acknowledgement of the legal bomb she had just dropped on my life. There was only a cool, assessing stare, as if I were a problem she had already solved. Then she turned her back to me, dismissing my existence entirely. The message was clear. This was not a negotiation. It was a declaration of war, and she believed she held all the weapons. She had lawyers, the resources of an entire HOA, and the unshakable confidence of someone who had never been told no. But she had made one critical miscalculation. She had targeted a man who knew the truth down to the millimeter, and who had nothing left to lose but the peace she had already shattered. That night, I didn't light a fire. I started building one. I began scanning every document, every map, every photograph I had of the land before the development. The battle was joined, and the first shot had been fired not by me, but by a woman so confident in her own power that she never considered I might know how to fight back. The weeks that followed the notice were a masterclass in psychological warfare. The official letters from Finch and Sterling kept coming, each one more insistent, each deadline more urgent. The language escalated from demand to ultimatum, threatening, liens, daily fines, and legal action that would supposedly bury me in court costs. I stopped reading them after the third one. They went into an expanding file folder I labeled Vance's Folly. But the letters were only the overture. The real pressure was more subtle, more insidious. It started with the trucks. Large delivery trucks marked with the names of landscaping companies or pool services would rattle up the private road to Serenity Heights, then pause, idling loudly, directly opposite my driveway. They weren't blocking it, not quite, but their presence was a constant diesel-fueled reminder of the community that loomed over me. They would sit there for 10, 15 minutes at a time, for no apparent reason, before moving on. Then came the nighttime disturbances. On 2 separate occasions, deep in the dead of night, the sharp crack of a branch would jolt me awake. Outside, the motion-activated lights on my workshop would be blazing, illuminating nothing but the empty yard. The security camera feeds showed only shadows dancing at the edge of the tree line. It could have been coyotes. It probably was coyotes. But the timing felt intentional, a campaign to fray my nerves and make me feel unsafe in my own home. The social isolation became palpable. On the rare occasion I drove through the Serenity Heights gates to reach the main road, a right-of-way that was part of my original deed, the change was instant. Neighbors who had once offered hesitant waves now looked straight through me. Mothers gathered at the community mail cluster would fall silent as I approached, their conversations dying mid-sentence, only to resume in hushed tones once I passed. I had become a ghost in my own neighborhood, a non-person erased by the HOA. President's decree. I hired my own surveyor, an old colleague named Ben Carter, who ran the most respected independent firm in the county. He was a man of few words and impeccable integrity. When I showed him the HOA's map, he let out a low whistle. "This isn't a surveying error," he said, his voice flat. "This is a fantasy." He and his team arrived the next morning with a truck full of equipment so advanced it made my old federal gear look antique. They worked with a quiet efficiency, their GPS rovers and laser scanners mapping the truth of the land with silent digital certainty. Evelyn Vance did not like this. On the second day of the survey, she appeared on the edge of the property line, flanked by 2 other HOA board members. They did not cross onto my land. They just stood there, watching, their arms crossed in unison. It was a silent protest, a show of force designed to intimidate Ben and his crew. Ben, to his credit, ignored them completely. He simply took a reading from a tripod set up 10 feet from where they stood, the device emitting a soft, beeping confirmation of a boundary pin he had just located. The tension was a physical thing, a wire stretched taut between my property and hers. The survey took 3 days. On the final afternoon, Ben packed up his equipment without a word, his face unreadable. He promised me the full, certified report would be delivered within 48 hours. The wait was agony. Every hour felt like a lifetime. Every sound from the direction of Serenity Heights felt like a threat. I spent the time reinforcing my files, preparing my evidence and trying to steady my nerves for the truth I knew was coming. The report would be my weapon. But as I would soon discover, Evelyn Vance was already preparing a counterattack far more personal and devastating than any legal notice. The real battle was just beginning, and the first casualty would be my belief that the truth was enough to win. Ben Carter's report arrived by certified mail. The envelope was thick, weighty with consequence. I carried it to my kitchen table, my heart hammering against my ribs, and sliced it open with a bone-handled knife. The first page was a cover letter, written in Ben's characteristically dry prose. The second page was the summary of findings, My eyes scanned the technical data, the coordinates, the tolerances, and then landed on the conclusion, stated in bold, unambiguous text. Based on geodetic survey data correlated with county benchmark, SON PL12, and original parcel plat, filed June 2, 2019, it is the finding of this office that the primary dwelling and associated improvements located at 1498 Cypress View Lane, Serenity Heights, Sonoma County, CA encroach upon the subject property, 1583 Juniper Hollow Road, Willow Creek, Sonoma County, CA by approximately 0.87 acres. The encroachment includes the western foundation wall, a detached guest house, a swimming pool, and a paved patio area. I read it twice. 3 times. The numbers danced on the page, each one a validation of everything I knew to be true. She had done it. She had literally built her dream home on my land. The violation notices, the intimidation, it had all been a smokescreen for the biggest property theft I had ever encountered. A wild, triumphant laugh escaped my lips. I had her. I had her cold. But triumph was quickly followed by a cold drip of dread. If her house was on my land, then the property lines she had been enforcing, the map she had used to sue me, were not just wrong. They were a deliberate fraud. This was no longer a simple boundary dispute. This was something much darker. I spent the rest of the day compiling a package, a copy of the certified survey, my original deed, and a pointed letter to Finch and Sterling demanding they immediately withdraw their false claims and advise their client to cease all trespass. I sent it certified, return receipt requested. 2 days later, the receipt came back, signed by a paralegal. There was no other response. Silence. It was more unnerving than any legal threat. It was as if I had thrown a stone into a deep, dark well and heard no splash. The silence broke on a Saturday morning. I was splitting firewood out back when a county sheriff's cruiser rolled slowly up my driveway. A deputy stepped out, his posture professional but not hostile. He asked if I was the homeowner and then handed me a folded packet of papers. It was a temporary restraining order. Evelyn Vance had filed it, alleging that I was harassing her, that my baseless accusations and aggressive surveillance, a reference to Ben's survey, were creating a hostile environment, and she feared for her safety. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She was the trespasser, the fraud, the aggressor, and she had somehow convinced a judge to issue an order against me. The TRO prohibited me from coming within 500 feet of her property line, which, given the geography, effectively meant I could not access the back half of my own land, the very land she was occupying. I couldn't even check on the survey pins without violating a court order. It was a brilliant, ruthless legal maneuver. She had used the system to lock me out of my own property, to protect her illegal occupation. The law, which I had believed would be my shield, had been twisted into her sword. I stood there in my driveway, the restraining order feeling like a physical weight in my hand, the sound of her lawn sprinklers kicking on a taunting melody from across the line. I had the truth on my side, but she had the first move in a game I didn't yet know how to play. The survey was my atomic bomb, but she had just launched a preemptive strike that left me paralyzed, unable to press the button. For the first time, I understood the true depth of her power and the lengths she would go to keep it. The fight had just escalated from a property dispute to a cage match, and I was suddenly the one backed into a corner. The restraining order was a prison of her design. I was a surveyor forbidden from surveying, a landowner barred from his land. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Angela Rossi, filed an immediate motion to dismiss the TRO, calling it a frivolous and bad-faith tactic. But the wheels of justice grind slowly, and every day the order was in effect was a day Evelyn Vance consolidated her hold on my property. I felt like I was suffocating. The injustice was a constant acid burn in my gut. I took to studying the Serenity Heights Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, the CC&Rs, the Bible by which Evelyn ruled her kingdom. I pored over the dense, mind-numbing text late into the night, looking for a loophole, a contradiction, anything I could use. The documents were a masterpiece of control, governing everything from paint colors to pet breeds to the acceptable angle of patio umbrellas. And then I found it. Buried in a subsection about Architectural Control Committee discretion was a single, seemingly innocuous sentence. No improvement, permanent or temporary, shall be erected, placed, or altered on any lot until the construction plans and a certified site plan showing the precise location of the structure have been approved in writing by the Architectural Control Committee. My mind raced. Evelyn's house, her pool, her guest house, they were all improvements. According to Ben's survey, they were on my lot, not an HOA lot, but the CC&R stated that any improvement required ACC approval and a certified site plan. I had never approved anything. I was the legal owner of the land she had built on. Therefore, by the HOA's own rules, every structure on that 0.87 acres was in blatant, dramatic violation. The irony was so perfect, it was cruel. She was fining me for a fence stain, while her own mansion was the single greatest violation in the entire history of the HOA. I immediately called Angela Rossi. She was silent for a long moment after I explained it. "That's diabolical," she finally said, a note of admiration in her voice. "We can use this." The next morning, I did something beautiful. Using the official forms I downloaded from the Serenity Heights HOA website, I filled out a complaint of covenant violation. In the section describing the violation, I wrote, "Unauthorized improvements, including primary dwelling, swimming pool, and detached guest house constructed on lot without approval from landowner or Architectural Control Committee. See attached certified survey and deed." I listed the violator as Evelyn Vance, homeowner. I listed the location of the violation with my property's legal description. I signed it with a flourish and mailed it to the HOA's management company with a copy to Finch and Sterling. It was a declaration of war using their own laws. I was hitting her with her own weapon. The response was not what I expected. There was no response from the HOA. But 2 days later, I received a visitor. It was Harold Pritchard, a retired accountant who lived 3 doors down from Evelyn. I had seen him at the cluster mailboxes, a quiet man who always seemed slightly uncomfortable in his own golf shirts. He stood on my porch, shifting his weight nervously. He didn't want to be seen, he said. He told me that my violation notice had caused a firestorm in the HOA board's private email chain. Evelyn was furious, but she couldn't make it go away. The management company was obligated to process it. But that wasn't why he was there. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to look at the original community plat," he said, "the one filed by the developer. Don't look at the lines. Look at the easements." He left as quickly as he arrived, melting back into the perfectly landscaped streets of Serenity Heights. I immediately went online and pulled up the digital copies of the original subdivision plat from the Sonoma County database. I had looked at it before, but only to confirm the property lines. This time, I looked at the utility easements, the drainage easements, the shared access easements. And there it was. A small, narrow utility easement ran along the very back of the developed lots, right where Evelyn's house stood. It was a standard easement for power lines, but according to the document, that easement was designated to be a minimum of 15 feet wide. Using the scale on the plat and overlaying it with Ben's survey, a cold realization washed over me. Evelyn's pool and patio didn't just encroach on my land. They had been built directly on top of the dedicated utility easement. She had not only stolen my land, she had built illegal structures on a county easement, potentially blocking access for vital repairs. She had broken not just HOA rules, but county law. The game had just changed again. It was no longer about winning a dispute. It was about exposing a conspiracy, and I now had the first thread to pull. The discovery of the easement violation was a nuclear option, and I handled it with care. I didn't shout it from the rooftops. Instead, I scheduled a meeting with a junior official at the County Planning and Zoning Department. I presented the facts dryly, without emotion. Here is the recorded plat. Here is a certified survey showing structures built upon the designated easement. I presented it not as a personal grievance, but as a matter of public safety and regulatory integrity. The junior official's eyes went wide. He promised to escalate it immediately. The effect was electric and terrifying. Within 48 hours, a county code enforcement officer was walking the perimeter of Evelyn Vance's property, taking photographs and consulting a tablet. I watched from my kitchen window, my heart thudding. This was no longer a private war. The government had just entered the battlefield. Evelyn's response was swift and brutal. The next day, my motion to dismiss the restraining order was heard by a judge. Finch and Sterling argued vehemently that I was a dangerous provocateur, now engaging government agencies in a campaign of harassment against their client. They painted me as unhinged, obsessed. The judge, perhaps swayed by the sheer force of their legal firepower, denied my motion. The restraining order would stand pending a full hearing in 3 weeks. I was devastated. The law felt like a rubber band, stretching to serve whoever pulled hardest. Angela Rossi assured me it was a temporary setback, a procedural battle. But the loss was a heavy blow. The walls were closing in. The financial strain was becoming real. Angela's retainer was significant, and the prospect of a protracted legal war was daunting. The pressure took on a new, more sinister form. One evening, I found a dead rat placed neatly on my welcome mat. It could have been a cat, but it felt like a message. A few days later, I came home to find the air had been let out of all 4 tires on my truck. There were no slash marks, no broken windows. Just a slow, tedious act of vandalism designed to inconvenience and intimidate. I installed more security cameras, their red LEDs glowing in the dusk like watchful eyes, but the feeling of being hunted persisted. The HOA's annual meeting was announced. It was to be held at the community clubhouse, a stone's throw from my property line. The agenda included a vote to increase legal fees for ongoing litigation. It was a not-so-subtle way to get her neighbors to fund her war against me. I couldn't attend, of course, because of the restraining order, but I didn't need to. The morning after the meeting, I found a plain envelope tucked into my door jamb. There was no note, just a USB drive inside. With trembling hands, I plugged it into my computer. It contained a single audio file. I clicked play. The sound was muffled but clear enough. It was the HOA meeting. I heard Evelyn's voice, crisp and commanding, telling the assembled homeowners about the troublesome neighbor who was threatening their property values with fake surveys. Then came the vote. The ayes carried it overwhelmingly. But then, a voice I recognized, it was Harold Pritchard, spoke up. He asked a simple question. Madam President, for the sake of transparency, could the board share the original community survey so homeowners can understand the basis of this dispute? The silence on the recording was profound. Then Evelyn's voice returned, cold and sharp. That is proprietary HOA business, she snapped. Not subject to discussion. Next item. The file ended. Someone had risked everything to get me that recording. It was proof of her evasion, her refusal to be transparent. It was the sound of a dictator silencing dissent. That tiny USB drive felt heavier than any legal document. It was no longer just my word against hers. I had an ally in the belly of the beast, and I had evidence of her corruption. The clock was ticking down to the restraining order hearing, but I was no longer just playing defense. I was gathering an army, one silent, fearful member at a time. The final showdown was taking shape, and it would be fought not just with surveys, and deeds, but with the truth whispered in the dark and recorded for the world to hear. The week before the restraining order hearing was a vortex of anxiety and preparation. Angela Rossi and I met daily, building our case, anticipating every argument Finch and Sterling would throw at us. We were focused on the narrow issue of the proving I was not a threat, that the order was a strategic ploy, but in the back of my mind, the bigger war, the war for my land, loomed large. The revelation came from an unexpected email. It was from a woman named Maya Torres, who identified herself as the former assistant to the developer who had built Serenity Heights. She had seen the local news coverage about the neighbor dispute and felt compelled to reach out. She claimed she had been let go abruptly shortly after the development's completion and had always suspected it was because she asked too many questions about the final land surveys. We arranged to speak on an encrypted line. Her voice was nervous but firm. She told me that the developer, a man named Marcus Delaney, had been under immense financial pressure to finish Serenity Heights. He had sold the lots to Evelyn Vance and other early buyers at a premium based on specific generous lot sizes. But there was a problem. Late in the process, a preliminary topographic survey had suggested the original lot lines might need to be adjusted slightly to account for a drainage issue. Adjusting them would have made some lots, including Evelyn's, smaller and less valuable. The developer couldn't afford to replat the entire subdivision or discount the lots. So, according to the former assistant, he made a choice. He allegedly instructed the surveying company to use an older pre-topographic survey to draw the final legal plat, the one that was filed with the county. This older map showed the lots, with their original, larger boundaries. The new survey, the one that showed the problem, was allegedly buried. This wasn't just about Evelyn Vance. This was about the entire foundation of Serenity Heights. The HOA was enforcing rules based on a property map that might have been fraudulent from the very beginning. Evelyn may have discovered this later, or she may have been in on it from the start. The assistant didn't know, but she did know one thing. The surveying company that did the final filed plat was a small, now defunct outfit called Redwood Surveying Co., and the head of that company was the brother-in-law of the developer. I sat back in my chair, the breath knocked out of me. The scale of it was staggering. My dispute with Evelyn wasn't an isolated incident. It was the symptom of a foundational lie upon which an entire community had been built. Her theft of my land wasn't just greed, it was a desperate attempt to cover up the original sin of the development. If my land was suddenly hers, then the lot size discrepancy would disappear. She wasn't just protecting her mansion. She was protecting the property values of every homeowner in Serenity Heights and the reputation of a developer who had likely committed fraud. I had gone looking for a property line and stumbled into a conspiracy. Angela Rossi listened to my summary, her silence on the other end of the phone speaking volumes. "This changes everything," she finally said, her voice tight with excitement. "This isn't a boundary dispute anymore. This is potential fraud. Racketeering even. The hearing tomorrow is about the TRO, but we need to be ready to pivot. We have to be careful how we introduce this." The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep. I paced my house, the pieces of the puzzle swirling in my mind. The fraudulent plat, the easement violation, the illegal structures, the silenced assistant, it all connected. Evelyn Vance wasn't just a corrupt HOA president. She was the guardian of a secret that could destroy the entire community she purported to lead. And tomorrow, in a courtroom, I would have my first chance to publicly pull on that thread. The hearing was no longer about a restraining order. It was the first crack in the dam, and I was about to swing a sledgehammer. The county courthouse was a temple of cold, hard light and the smell of old paper and anxiety. I wore a suit I hadn't worn in years, the wool scratchy and unfamiliar against my skin. Angela Rossi met me on the steps, her briefcase clutched tightly in her hand. "Remember," she said, her voice low and steady, The narrow issue is the TRO. We are here to prove you are not a threat. But if they open the door to the larger issue, we walk right through it. Be calm. Be factual. Let the documents speak. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I expected, all dark wood and worn leather. And there she was. Evelyn Vance sat at the plaintiff's table beside a tall, severe man I assumed was the lead attorney from Finch and Sterling. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit, her posture ramrod straight, her face a mask of composed victimhood. She did not look at me. The judge entered, Judge Samuel Benton, a weary-looking man with a reputation for impatience with frivolity. He listened as Evelyn's attorney laid out their case. He painted a picture of a reclusive, unstable man who had launched a campaign of harassment against a dedicated community leader over a simple surveying misunderstanding. He described my certified survey as a rogue document, my violation complaint as harassing paperwork, and my contact with the county as an attempt to weaponize the government. He held up the dead rat incident and the slashed tires as evidence of the dangerous atmosphere I had created. Then it was Angela's turn. She was calm, methodical, and devastating. She stood and approached the bench. "Your Honor," she began, "if we could please enter into evidence these documents." She submitted Ben, Carter's certified survey, his impeccable credentials, and the original county deed. "The only thing rogue in this courtroom," she said, her voice cutting through the stuffy air, "is the plaintiff's breathtaking attempt to seize nearly an acre of private property through legal intimidation and falsified maps." She systematically dismantled their narrative. The harassing paperwork was a legitimate use of the HOA's own official channels. The contact with the county was a citizen's duty to report a potential public safety issue regarding an easement. As for the alleged acts of vandalism, she pointed out, there was zero evidence connecting them to my client. In fact, given the intense motivation of the plaintiff to silence him, one might look much closer to home for the source of those intimidation tactics. Evelyn's attorney objected repeatedly, but Angela was prepared for each one, her responses crisp and legalistic. The judge's impatient expression began to morph into one of deep interest. The hearing was supposed to be narrow, but Angela had successfully turned it into a preview of the main event. Then came the moment. Evelyn's attorney, perhaps feeling the ground shift, made a fatal mistake. In his rebuttal, he said, "Your Honor, my client has lived in good faith on that property for years. The boundaries of Serenity Heights have been established and accepted by the entire community. This gentleman's last-minute alternative survey cannot undo that." Angela was on her feet before he finished his sentence. "Good faith, Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing with contempt. "Would good faith include building a swimming pool on a county utility easement? Would good faith include refusing to produce the original community survey when asked by her own homeowners?" She turned and looked directly at Evelyn. "And does HS good faith explain why the president of the HOA is enforcing rules based on a property plat that, according to a whistleblower from the original development company, may have been fraudulently filed? With the county to hide inaccurate lot sizes?" The gasp in the courtroom was audible. Evelyn Vance went bone white. Her attorney shot to his feet, shouting, "Objection! Hearsay! Speculation!" The judge slammed his gavel, but the damage was done. The word fraudulently hung in the air like smoke. The judge called both attorneys to the bench for a furious, whispered conversation. I could see the panic on the face of Finch and Sterling. They had come to swat a fly and had stumbled into a hornet's nest. The judge returned to his seat, his face grim. He looked at Evelyn Vance, then at me. "I am dissolving the temporary restraining order effective immediately," he announced. "The petitioner has failed to demonstrate a credible threat. However," he continued, his voice hardening, "the allegations raised here today are of an extremely serious nature. This court strongly advises both parties to seek a global resolution to this matter before it escalates further. This is no longer a neighborhood squabble. This has the distinct odor of something much larger." He adjourned the hearing. Evelyn Vance stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She shot me a look of pure, undiluted hatred before turning and almost fleeing the courtroom, her lawyers scrambling behind her. I had won the battle. The TRO was gone. I was free to walk my land, but the war was now fully engaged. The fraud had been named aloud in a court of law. There was no going back. The next move would be all-out war, and everyone in Serenity Heights was now a potential casualty. The weeks after the hearing were a quiet, tense calm before the absolute storm. The dissolution of the TRO was a victory, but it was a tactical one. The real war, for title, for damages, for exposing the fraud, was just beginning. Angela Rossi filed a massive countersuit on my behalf. It wasn't just against Evelyn Vance personally anymore. We named the Serenity Heights HOA as a co-defendant, and we included the original development company and the defunct surveying firm for good measure. The suit alleged fraud, conspiracy, trespass, slander of title, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages sought were astronomical, enough to bankrupt the HOA and Evelyn Vance several times over. The lawsuit was a bomb thrown into the heart of Serenity Heights. Homeowners who had been blissfully ignorant were now facing the prospect of their HOA dues skyrocketing to pay for a legal battle they never asked for. The community message boards, to which I was now anonymously granted access by a sympathetic homeowner, exploded with panic, anger, and confusion. Evelyn's carefully constructed facade of control began to crack under the pressure. Discovery was a bloodbath. Our legal demand for documents was relentless. All HOA financial records, all communications between the board and the developer, the original surveying data, emails, everything. Finch and Sterling fought every request, but the judge, now fully aware of the stakes, was having none of it. He ordered full compliance, and then the documents started to arrive. Boxes of them. Angela and her team set up a war room in her office, and I spent days there surrounded by paper helping to decipher the story they told. It was a story of lies piled upon lies. We found internal emails from the developer discussing the topo issue and joking about giving the buyers a little extra sunshine. We found memos from the surveying company expressing concerns about using the old plat. But the smoking gun was an email chain between Evelyn Vance and the developer, dated just weeks after she purchased her lot. In it, the developer assured her that her lot's boundaries were secure and as promised, despite some pesky survey questions. Evelyn replied, "I am holding you to the plat on file. My investment depends on it." She knew. She knew almost from the very beginning that the foundations of her kingdom were built on sand. Her entire campaign against me wasn't just about land. It was about covering up a secret she had been complicit in for years. The trial date arrived. There would be no quiet settlement. Evelyn was backed into a corner fighting for her financial life and her reputation. The courtroom was packed with reporters and anxious Serenity Heights residents. The air was so thick with tension you could taste it. The trial was a blur of technical testimony and devastating revelations. Ben Carter took the stand and explained his survey with a clarity that made the HOA's map look like a childish forgery. The county code enforcement officer testified about the easement violation, and then Angela called the former developer's assistant to the stand. Her testimony was quiet, precise, and utterly damning. She outlined the entire cover-up, confirming the existence of the suppressed topographic survey. Evelyn Vance took the stand in her own defense. Under Angela's relentless cross-examination, her composure shattered. She contradicted herself. She claimed not to remember emails she had sent. She tried to blame the developer, the surveyors, everyone but herself. Angela finally held up a copy of the email where Evelyn acknowledged the pesky survey questions. Knew the map was wrong, didn't you, Miss Vance? Angela asked, her voice cold and clear. I relied on what was filed, Evelyn stammered. You didn't just rely on it, Angela pressed. You enforced it. You used it to sue my client. You used it to try to steal his land to cover up the original fraud. This was never about a misunderstanding, was it? It was about a conspiracy to protect your investment at any cost, even if that cost was your neighbor's home. Evelyn looked out at the courtroom, at the faces of her neighbors, her constituents, and she saw nothing but disbelief and betrayal. She closed her eyes and didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was, finally, painfully clear to everyone in the room. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. The verdict was a complete and total vindication. They found in my favor on every single count. The judgment was staggering. Full title to the encroached upon land, compensatory damages for trespass and emotional distress, and punitive damages meant to punish the breathtaking bad faith. The judge also issued a permanent injunction ordering the immediate removal of all structures on my land at the defendant's expense. But the final crushing blow was yet to come. As the court was adjourning, the judge made one more announcement. Given the evidence of potential fraud in the original plat filing, he said, this court is compelled to refer this matter to the district attorney's office and the state board for professional land surveyors for criminal investigation. The gavel fell. It was over. Evelyn Vance did not move. She sat at the defendant's table, her head in her hands, as the world she had built came crashing down around her. I felt no joy, no triumph. Only a profound, exhausted sense of justice finally served. I had taken everything back, and in doing so, I had exposed a corruption that went far deeper than anyone could have imagined. The victory was complete, but the cost had been immense, and the echoes of that courtroom gavel would reverberate through Serenity Heights for years to come. Was justice served, or was it too late? Comment down. The aftermath was a quiet, methodical unraveling. Evelyn Vance resigned from the HOA board the day after the verdict. She avoided criminal charges by agreeing to a plea deal that involved testimony against the developer, but her reputation was ash. Her real estate license was revoked. The once proud for sale sign that went up in front of her mansion seemed to wilt in the sun, a monument to hubris. The court-appointed crew arrived to dismantle the structures on my land. It was a strange, cathartic spectacle to watch her glittering pool be jackhammered into rubble, her guest house disassembled piece by piece. The land was restored, the boundary pins once again standing proud and unchallenged. The physical scar on my property was healing. The financial judgment was paid from the HOA's insurance and a forced sale of Evelyn's assets. The money was life-changing, but I didn't want a monument to her excess. Using the funds, I established a legal defense foundation for homeowners fighting corrupt HOAs, naming it after Harold Pritchard, the quiet accountant who had first dared to help me. The fight that had consumed me would now help others. Serenity Heights was forever changed. The HOA was placed under court supervision for 5 years. Mandatory audits revealed years of financial mismanagement. The original plat was officially amended, shrinking some lot sizes and causing a brief panic that eventually settled into a new, more honest reality. The community, humbled and chastened, elected a new board focused on transparency, not control. 1. Autumn evening, a year after the trial, I was sitting on my porch when a car pulled up. It was Harold Pritchard, the retired accountant. He didn't say much. He just handed me a pecan pie his wife had baked and nodded toward the now empty space, where the pool had been. "Looks right," he said. I thanked him. He nodded again and drove away. It was the first pie of many, a silent, edible apology from a neighborhood that had been blind for too long. I never spoke to Evelyn Vance again. I heard she moved to another state, to a condo with no yard and no homeowners association. a fitting end for a woman who had loved, control more than community. As for me, the silence finally returned, the wind in the junipers, the cry of the hawks. But the peace was different now. It was a peace that had been fought for, earned through a fire of conflict. I had my land back, my name cleared, my solitude restored. But I also had the knowledge of how fragile it all is, how quickly order can curdle into tyranny when good people look away. The victory was sweet, but the memory of the fight is a permanent resident on my land, a quiet sentinel that ensures I will never again take the truth of a clean property line for granted. The court gave me back my land, but the battle gave me back my voice.